3,000 years ago, a powerful kingdom named Urartu thrived in the Near East. Its people built impregnable fortresses into mountain slopes and engineered dams, canals, and aqueducts, many of which still function today. Their main enemy was Assyria, an aggressive empire that made the ancient world tremble. In the Bible, this land is referred to as Ararat, the place where, according to legend, Noah's Ark came to rest after the Great Flood. Despite this mention in sacred texts, the kingdom itself faded from historical memory for centuries. Now it's time to put Urartu back on the map. In the chaos of the late Bronze Age collapse, the Hittite Empire fell. The entire region of eastern Anatolia and the Armenian Highlands, once the outer ridge of Hittite rule, was left without centralized authority. A great power that had controlled trade routes, resources, and borders for centuries had crumbled, and in its place, a patchwork of small tribal alliances and principalities emerged. Everyone was left to survive on their own. During this time, the Armenian Highlands were home to a mix of tribes. The region was inhabited by descendants of the Hittites, as well as the Phrygians, Luwians, and others. But it was the Hurrians who played a decisive role. They were migrants from the south who arrived after the fall of their kingdom, Mitanni, which had been crushed by three major powers: Assyria, Egypt, and the Hittites. It was the Hurrian legacy, language, religion, and cultural elements that laid the foundation for what would become the kingdom of Urartu. For several centuries, the region lacked a unified authority. It was a land of mountain fortresses, each one dominating the surrounding valleys. The inhabitants of the Armenian Highlands traded with Mesopotamia, the South Caucasus, and the Iranian Plateau. Assyrian sources referred to these lands as the land of Nairi. The mountains were rich in copper, iron, gold, and silver. Rivers provided water for farming, and the highland pastures supported livestock herding. Starting with Tiglath-Pileser I, Assyrian kings launched repeated campaigns northward, aiming to seize the region's resources and control its trade routes. They raided and destroyed settlements, took people into slavery, and imposed heavy tribute on those who remained. Faced with the constant threat of Assyria, the peoples of the Armenian Highlands began to unite. Around the 9th century BC, a centralized state began to form out of the Nairi tribes. This was the birth of Urartu. The name Urartu comes from Assyrian records, but the people of this kingdom called their land Bianili. The first king of Urartu whose name appears in written records was Aramu. He ruled in the first half of the 9th century BC and led the resistance against Assyrian expansion. His name is mentioned in the annals of the Assyrian king Shalmaneser III. One passage reads, "I approached the fortified city of Aramu and Urartu, laid siege to it and captured it. I slaughtered many of its warriors, built a tower of heads in front of the city, and burned 14 of its surrounding settlements in fire. I marched to the sea in the land of Nairi, washed my weapons in the sea, and made offerings to my gods. Then I made an image of myself, inscribed on it praise to Asher, the great Lord, my master, and the victories of my might, and I set it up by the sea." Aramu strengthened fortresses and worked to unify the fragmented regions under a single rule. But with relentless Assyrian raids, his power was limited. He was a king of a transitional era, guiding Urartu from a loose tribal confederation toward becoming a true state. After Aramu, Sarduri I came to power in 835 BC. Under his rule, Urartu finally emerged as a centralized kingdom. He moved the capital to the fortress of Tushpa, located on the shores of the saltwater lake Van. Like his predecessor, Sarduri focused on resisting Assyrian aggression. But he went further. He unified the country, strengthened its defenses, and reorganized the army. Cuneiform inscriptions show that Sarduri managed to halt the westward advance of the Assyrians at the borders of the Armenian Highlands. From that point on, Assyria could no longer deliver a crushing blow to Urartu. It was under Sarduri I that the kingdom achieved real stability for the first time, marking the beginning of its growth and expansion. Tushpa became the political and economic hub of the kingdom. To manage Urartu's vast territories, Sarduri established an administrative system, clearly influenced by the Assyrian model. Urartu took shape as a vertically structured military monarchy. At the top was the king, followed by regional governors and military commanders, often chosen from the royal family or trusted inner circle. Local officials or viceroys were responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining order, and ensuring supplies reached the capital. At the foot of the Van Rock, a fortress wall still stands, built from massive stone blocks. On it is an inscription in the Assyrian language, the earliest known written record of Urartu itself. Here is a fragment of that text. Inscription of Sarduri, son of Lutipri, great king, mighty king, king of the universe, king of the land of Nairi, a king without equal, a wondrous shepherd unafraid of battle, a king who subdues the rebellious. I, Sarduri, son of Lutipri, king of kings, to whom all other kings paid tribute. Thus says Sarduri, son of Lutipri, I brought these stones from the city of Alniunu and built this wall. The cities and fortresses built during Sarduri I's reign show that the kingdom lived under constant military threat. Urartian defenses were designed for long-term resistance in the event of a siege. Capturing them required siege engines, something the Assyrians struggled to use effectively in mountainous terrain and during winter. As a result, most wars were fought in the summer. In 828 BC, Sarduri's son Ishpuini ascended the throne of Urartu. He carried out a major religious reform that established the cult of the supreme god Haldi as the central pillar of the kingdom's spiritual and political identity. Haldi became the symbol of strength, authority, and divine protection, a war god, protector of the king, and in the Urartian worldview, a rival even to Ashur, the chief deity of Assyria. His name was invoked in prayers for victory, prosperity, and fortune. Haldi was often depicted standing on the back of a lion, holding a sword or a spear. Second in importance was Tushpa, the god of thunder and storms. Next came Shivini, the god of the sun and justice. Together, Haldi, Tushpa, and Shivini formed the main triad of the Urartian pantheon. Other deities played a much smaller role. These included goddesses of fertility, spirits tied to specific landscapes, and guardians of rivers, springs, and mountains. Many of these figures were borrowed from the Hittites, Hurrians, Semitic peoples, and Caucasian tribes. The main religious center of Urartu was the city of Musasir, located outside the kingdom's core territory, southwest, near the border with Assyria. It was home to the principal temple of Haldi, a national shrine where pilgrims from across the kingdom came to worship, especially soldiers and farmers who believed their fate depended on the god's favor. Ishpuini's religious reform strengthened the ideological unity of Urartu and gave royal authority a sacred dimension. From that point on, the king was seen as the chosen one of the gods. He also pursued an active foreign policy. Ishpuini led military campaigns against tribes in the South Caucasus, whose raids threatened the kingdom's northern borders. But his most significant military achievement was the capture of the fortress of Musasir, located southwest of Lake Urmia. Musasir would later become one of Urartu's key strategic strongholds in its ongoing struggle with Assyria. After Ishpuini's death in 810 BC, the throne passed to his son, Menua. Under his rule, Urartu entered a phase of rapid expansion, both internally and externally. Menua's strength and royal authority developed the administrative system and extended the kingdom's borders. But his greatest legacy was a series of massive infrastructure projects. Menua understood that controlling a vast and mountainous land required reliable roads, access to water, and stable supply lines. It was during his reign that Urartu launched an ambitious irrigation program. He ordered the construction of dozens of canals, aqueducts, and water pipelines to bring mountain rivers and lakes to cities and farmland. The most famous of these projects was the Menua Canal, nearly 70 kilometers long. It runs from mountain springs to their capital and is still in use today, feeding the modern water system around Lake Van. In terms of engineering, it was unmatched in the region at the time. Urartian engineers had to maintain a precise gradient, just 1 meter of drop per kilometer, often carving through solid rock and navigating around deep ravines. This monumental project dramatically boosted the agricultural capacity of Urartu's central regions, making it possible to feed a growing army and population. Along the channel's route, cuneiform inscriptions carved into stone proclaim, "This is the canal of Menua, son of Ishpuini, great king, mighty king, king of the land of the Bienili." Menua also built numerous new cities and fortresses, both in the heart of the kingdom, such as Menua and Manzikert, and along its borders, where he established a network of strategic strongholds. These fortresses served as both military outposts and administrative centers. Each was equipped with storage facilities, garrisons, and water reservoirs as they were connected by paved roads. This system created a framework for permanent control over the surrounding areas, allowing for rapid military response and efficient governance of a vast territory. Menua personally oversaw much of the construction, an effort confirmed by the many inscriptions carved into cliffs and walls throughout the kingdom. It was during his reign that the first cuneiform inscriptions in the Urartian language began to appear. But Menua was more than an engineer. He was also a military commander. He led a series of campaigns that significantly expanded Urartu's borders. To the north, he pushed the frontier to the Araxes River. To the west, he subdued a number of Hittite successor principalities left in the wake of the Hittite Empire's collapse. As a result, Urartu reached as far as the headwaters of the Euphrates in the west and extended into what is now northern Armenia. Taking advantage of Assyria's temporary weakness, Menua also launched campaigns into the land of Mana, southeast of Lake Urmia, bringing that region into Urartu's sphere of influence. Menua ruled for nearly 30 years. Through his internal reforms and foreign conquests, he transformed Urartu into a powerful empire. He revitalized the economy, strengthened the military, and reinforced state institutions. When he came to power, Urartu was still a relatively fragile kingdom. By the time of his death in 786 BC, he had passed on to his son Argishti I, a strong unified state, capable of standing its ground against any rival. When Argishti I came to power, he faced immediate and serious challenges. To the south loomed the threat of Assyria. King Shalmaneser IV was determined to regain control over the metal supply routes to Mesopotamia. In the north, formerly scattered tribes had united into a powerful confederation that launched frequent raids into Urartian territory. A two-front war could have been disastrous for the young kingdom. Argishti knew that he couldn't afford to wait. He struck first, marching north with his army, crushing pockets of resistance and dismantling enemy strongholds. The campaign was swift and decisive. The northern frontier was secured, allowing him to turn his full attention to Urartu's main adversary, Assyria. He didn't wait for an attack. Instead, Argishti launched a preemptive strike. After a series of victorious battles, he devastated Assyrian border provinces and drove the enemy back from Urartian lands. Assyrian annals of the time refer to Argishti I as a defiant king, describing him as terrible like a storm. Under Argishti, Urartu's army became one of the first in the world to be fully equipped with iron weapons, thanks to the kingdom's rich iron deposits. This gave Urartu a decisive edge in battle and helped solidify Argishti's reputation as one of the most formidable warrior kings. As Urartu's territory expanded, so did the need for tighter control and effective governance. Argishti responded by founding numerous new fortresses and cities, built not only for defense, but also to serve as administrative hubs. These strongholds followed a typical Urartian design: massive stone walls, storage facilities, water reservoirs, garrisons, and an integrated network of roads. Inscriptions carved on their walls recorded Argishti's conquests and reinforced his legitimacy as the great king, subduer of nations. His most important construction project was the founding of the fortress city of Erebuni, built in 782 BC at the foot of Mount Ararat. in what is now modern-day Armenia. Erebuni became a symbol of Urartian power, a dual-purpose city that functioned as both a military base and an administrative capital. It featured temples, palaces, warehouses, workshops, and a sophisticated water supply system. One inscription on the fortress terrace reads, "Argishti, son of Menua, built this mighty city of Erebuni to strengthen the power of the land of Bayanili and to intimidate its enemies." Erebuni became Urartu's northern stronghold and solidified control over the Ararat plain. In time, the city would evolve into modern-day Yerevan, the capital of Armenia. Argishti I ruled for about 20 years, and in that time he expanded Urartu's borders and reinforced the kingdom from within. His legacy includes dozens of new cities, tighter control over the frontiers, and the transformation of Urartu into a true military empire, one capable of imposing its will on its neighbors. The Urartian army had a strict hierarchical structure. At its head stood the king, supreme commander of the armed forces. Beneath him were generals of the regular army and provincial governors who led local militias during wartime. Each province was obligated to provide both manpower and resources for military campaigns. The army was made up of permanent garrisons stationed in key fortresses and mobilized units drawn from the provinces. By the standards of the time, Urartian soldiers were well armed and well equipped. The core of the army was heavy infantry. Soldiers wore bronze or iron helmets and scale armor, leather cuirasses covered with rows of sewn-on metal scales. This was complemented by round wooden shields reinforced with metal fittings. Infantrymen carried a short sword and dagger, a spear, and a bow. Urartian bows were powerful, made from composite materials. Their arrows had three-edged iron tips, designed to pierce armor. Archers made up a significant portion of the army and played a key role in Urartu's battlefield strategy. Cavalry was one of the key components of Urartu's military system. Considered an elite force, it served as both a strike unit and a mobile reconnaissance arm. Cavalry provided rapid maneuverability in mountainous terrain, launched surprise attacks on enemy flanks and rear positions, pursued retreating forces, and played a decisive role in open field battles. Urartian horsemen wore armor similar to that of infantry, but also added greaves and bracers to protect their limbs. They were armed with shorter spears optimized for use on horseback, swords, and small round shields. Archaeological finds suggest that horses may also have been partially armored. Bronze faceplates and ornate bridle decorations have been discovered at several sites. Fortifications were another cornerstone of Urartu's defense system. Their most distinctive feature was their adaptation to the terrain. Urartian engineers skillfully built on natural elevations, rock outcrops, cliffs, and mountain ridges, using the landscape itself as part of the defense. This approach minimized vulnerable points and maximized defensive strength. It also reflected a high level of strategic planning. Urartian fortresses weren't just built on the land, they became part of the land itself. The walls of Urartian fortresses were built from massive blocks of finely cut basalt or andesite, fitted together with remarkable precision. This type of masonry gave the structures exceptional strength and durability. The walls often reached up to 10 meters in height and 3 meters in thickness. Towers were placed at regular intervals along the walls, reinforcing key angles and providing vantage points for defense. Entrances to the fortresses were also carefully designed with security in mind, usually set at right angles with narrow, easily defensible passageways that could be targeted from multiple angles. Inside the fortresses were storage buildings, barracks, granaries, and wells or cisterns. Every stronghold was built to withstand a prolonged siege, with food, water, and ammunition stockpiled well in advance. Many of these fortifications were connected by paved roads, enabling the rapid movement of reinforcements and supplies across the kingdom. Even today, the ruins of Urartian fortresses leave a powerful impression. Their sheer scale, meticulous planning, and outstanding stonework speak to a level of military architecture on par with the best examples of the ancient world. At the top of Urartu's political structure stood the king, or Sarduri in the Urartian language. His authority was virtually absolute. He served as supreme commander of the army, high priest, lawmaker, and chief judge all in one. Seen as the chosen of the god Haldi, his rule carried divine legitimacy and was considered sacred. Just below the king was the aristocracy, regional and tribal elites, royal relatives, priests, military commanders, and provincial governors. These figures held real power. They controlled key fortresses, collected taxes, led armies, participated in religious rites, and had the right to build their own estates and tombs. The day-to-day governance of Urartu's vast and complex territory rested on this elite class. Priests held a special place in society. As in many other ancient Near Eastern cultures, Urartian temples were not only religious centers, but also economic hubs. They owned large tracts of land worked by tenant farmers, maintained herds of livestock, stored grain, and played a central role in distributing resources. Priests conducted rituals, made offerings, interpreted the will of the gods, and practiced divination. The bulk of the population were free commoners. They owned land, paid taxes, contributed to public works, and could be conscripted into the military when needed. Below them were the landless freemen, personally free but without property. These individuals worked on lands owned by temples, nobles, or the state, often laboring in workshops, on irrigation systems, or in large construction projects. At the bottom of the societal hierarchy were slaves, typically prisoners of war, debtors, or criminals who had been enslaved. Slaves had no rights and were treated as property. They were used for hard labor on construction sites, in elite households, temple estates, and state infrastructure projects. Slaves could be sold, rented out, or inherited like any other asset. In 764 BC, power passed to Argishti I's son, Sarduri II. Under his reign, Urartu reached its peak of political and military power. Sarduri II pushed forward with expansion on all strategic fronts, north, east, and west. To the north, he consolidated control over the Ararat Plain and the South Caucasus. In the east, he expanded Urartian influence around Lake Urmia and into the borderlands of the Kingdom of Mana. In the west, his armies advanced toward the edges of Asia Minor, invading territories that had once belonged to the Hittites and later fell under Phrygian influence. As a result, under Sarduri II, Urartu became a true territorial superpower, stretching from the Caucasus to Upper Mesopotamia and from Lake Urmia to the Euphrates. Yet, like every other Urartian king before him, Sarduri II's greatest challenge remained the ongoing rivalry with Assyria. During this period, however, the Assyrian Empire was in deep crisis, a time of internal fragmentation. Provinces were breaking away from the center, and generals and governors were locked in civil wars, each vying for control of the imperial core. This period gave Urartu a rare and powerful opportunity to strike. Sarduri II seized on Assyria's weaknesses, launching a series of offensives into the northern Mesopotamia and pushing the Urartian border further south. For the first time, Urartu was able to impose its political will on Assyria, a rival that, not long before, had threatened the kingdom's very survival. Assyrian records from the time describe Urartu as a formidable military opponent. Sarduri II's army was large, well-organized, and backed by the extensive network of fortresses, roads, and supply lines built by his predecessors. It was during this period that the balance of power between Urartu and Assyria reached a critical stalemate. Neither side could land a decisive blow. This allowed Urartu to maintain strategic initiative for several decades. Beyond military power, Sarduri II also expanded Urartu's role in regional diplomacy. The kingdom began establishing formal relations with neighboring states. Historical sources mention alliances and diplomatic exchanges with Mana, the Amorite principalities of Syria and Asia Minor, and the Phoenician city-states. Urartu was no longer just a regional kingdom. It had become a full-fledged player in the Near Eastern politics, emerging as a true center of power and a credible counterweight to a weakened but still dangerous Assyria. But this balance of power didn't last long. In 745 BC, a new ruler came to power in Assyria. Tiglath-Pileser III. He launched sweeping reforms, reasserting control over the provinces, breaking the power with the nobility, centralizing the government, and radically reorganizing the army. Under his leadership, the Assyrian Empire quickly emerged from crisis and began reclaiming its lost territories. Urartu became one of Tiglath-Pileser's top priorities. He led a series of northern campaigns, driving Urartian garrisons out of border regions, regaining control over northern Mesopotamia, and expelling Urartu from the land of Mana. These offensives marked the first serious defeats for Urartu in decades. Sarduri II lost the initiative. He was no longer attacking, he was defending. The Assyrians systematically eroded Urartu's power, attacking its allies, devastating its frontier regions, and cutting off trade routes. Still, no decisive battle took place directly between Sarduri and Tiglath-Pileser. Realizing he couldn't withstand the renewed Assyrian war machine alone, Sarduri II assembled a coalition of anti-Assyrian forces, including various Syro-Hittite and Amorite principalities in the Near East. But it wasn't enough. In 735 BC, Tiglath-Pileser's forces dealt a crushing blow to the coalition army at the Battle of Arpad. Sarduri fled the battlefield and retreated with the remnants of his forces back to Tushpa. After the victory at Arpad, Tiglath-Pileser marched his army deep into Urartian territory, laying waste to everything in his path. Many of Urartu's former allies either switched sides or were crushed outright. Assyrian forces eventually laid siege to Urartu's capital, Tushpa. Here's how Tiglath-Pileser himself described the campaign. "I trapped Sarduri of Urartu in Tushpa, his royal city. I made a great slaughter before the city gates, and I set up an image of my greatness facing the city. I marched 60 leagues through the vast land of Urartu, from top to bottom, in triumph, encountering no opposition. The lands of Aluba and Habhu, lying at the foot of Mount Nal, I completely conquered and annexed into Assyria." Despite the intensity of the siege, Tushpa held out. The city was heavily fortified and well prepared for defense, and the Assyrians were unable to take it. Still, the mere presence of the Assyrian army at the gates of the capital was a devastating blow to Sarduri II's prestige. Soon after, Sarduri abdicated in favor of his son, Rusa I. The defeat on the Euphrates and the siege of Tushpa marked the symbolic end of Urartu's golden age. While the kingdom lost little territory, it suffered a critical strategic defeat. From this point on, the balance of power in the region shifted decisively in favor of Assyria. The new king, Rusa I, did not inherit absolute power. Sarduri II's defeat had shaken the kingdom's unity, and parts of the elite refused to recognize Rusa's authority. Urartu teetered on the edge of fragmentation. Several border regions took advantage of Tushpa's weakened position, attempting to gain independence or align themselves with Assyria. Yet through decisive action, Rusa I managed to prevent collapse and preserve Urartu's territorial integrity. Lacking a strong army at his disposal, he turned his focus to diplomacy and consolidating central power. He redistributed land to reward loyal military leaders, strengthened the administrative core of the state, and reasserted control over key border fortresses. In inscriptions from this period, Rusa often refers to himself not just as a king, but as the strong shepherd of the land of Bienili, son of the great Sarduri, who restored the foundation of the throne. Fortunately for Urartu, the geopolitical landscape shifted in its favor. Assyria redirected its focus to other fronts. Tiglath-Pileser III was now waging major campaigns in Syria, the Levant, and Babylonia. This gave Urartu a much-needed pause from direct conflict. Rusa took advantage of the breathing room. He reinforced the kingdom's defenses, overhauled military logistics, and began rebuilding the army. A number of fortresses were constructed or restored, and efforts were made to revive the economy in regions devastated by the earlier Assyrian invasions. But the fragile peace didn't last. In 722 BC, Sargon II rose to the throne of Assyria, one of the most energetic and ruthless leaders in the empire's history. He set out with a clear goal: to re-establish full control over the north and eliminate the Urartian threat once and for all. By 714 BC, he launched a major campaign against Rusa I. The Assyrian army invaded Urartu's eastern territories, advanced through the land of Mana, and struck the Urartian-held areas around Lake Urmia. The climax of this campaign came with the fall of Musasir, Urartu's most sacred religious center, home to the main temple of the supreme god Haldi. The Assyrians captured the city and looted the temple. They took gold, silver, jewels, sacred artifacts, statues of the gods, and most devastatingly, the golden statue of Haldi himself. In his royal annals, Sargon II proudly boasts of this act, framing it not just as a military victory, but as a direct blow to Urartu's faith and spiritual identity. The loss sent shockwaves through Urartian society. According to tradition, upon learning of Musasir's fall, Rusa I fell into despair and took his own life. The defeats of Sarduri II and Rusa I were the first major failures Urartu had suffered since Haldi had been declared the kingdom's supreme god. In the Urartian worldview, the weapon of Haldi had been overcome by the weapon of Ashur, the god of Assyria. These weren't just military losses, they were profound ideological defeats that struck at the very heart of Urartu's political and religious foundations. After the destruction of Musasir and the death of Rusa I, Urartu managed to avoid immediate collapse. Under the next kings, Argishti II, Rusa II, and Sarduri III, the kingdom retained its territorial integrity, but the process of decline had already begun. These rulers tried to stabilize the situation. They reinforced borders, rebuilt fortresses, and launched limited military campaigns. At times, Urartu even regained control over certain regions. But these were no longer acts of conquest. They were desperate efforts to hold on to what remained. The role of regional superpower had definitively passed to Assyria. At the same time, pressure from the north was growing. Nomadic tribes like the Cimmerians and Scythians began moving through the Caucasus, raiding Urartu's northern provinces, looting settlements, and threatening trade routes. A period of tense but relatively peaceful coexistence followed between Urartu and Assyria. Both powers avoided direct confrontation. Instead, trade flourished and diplomatic exchanges became regular. One record from the time of Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria, describes a visit from Urartian envoys. I, Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria, who, trusting in Ashur and Ishtar, my lords, subdued my enemies and calmed my heart. Rusa, king of Urartu, heard of the power of Ashur, my lord, and was overcome with fear at the majesty of my kingship. He sent his envoys to Arbela to inquire about my well-being. By this time, Urartu had effectively become a client state, dependent on Assyria and functioning as a buffer zone against nomadic incursions from the north. By the end of the 7th century BC, following the death of Ashurbanipal, Assyria, once invincible, fell into internal chaos. The empire collapsed rapidly under pressure from the Neo-Babylonian Empire and a new rising power in the east, Media. But the Medes don't stop with Assyria. Around 590 BC, they delivered the final blow to Urartu. Tushpa was destroyed, the royal dynasty was wiped out, and the kingdom was erased from the political map. In its place rose the Median Empire. With Urartu's fall, its written tradition came to an end. The memory of the once mighty kingdom faded almost completely. All that survived were its ruined fortresses and the inscriptions carved in stone, silent echoes of a forgotten power. If you made it to the end of this video, we really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Follow along on our journey through ancient civilizations and history. We put out new episodes every single week. If you'd like to support the channel, join our Patreon or become a YouTube channel member. You get early access to new episodes, behind-the-scenes looks, and more. You can also leave a super thanks below to give us a little extra boost. If you want to listen to history on the go, check out our all-new podcast, Parabellum History. You can find it on all major podcast platforms. Thanks again for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.